Welcome back to another video, folks. We just passed the 1 year mark of when we learned we were going to be moving onto this farm. And I just wanted to make a video talking about our story of how we found the place and what our situation is here at Wild East. Before we get into the video, please make sure to like it, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It really helps the channel grow and tell these stories and share our experience with more folks. Some of the riparian plantings have really put on some good growth. This is a young catalpa tree. It will one day grow up into the canopy. We've got a couple of little creek beaches that we can retreat to in the heat of the day. It stays nice and shady here. And there's several spots, including this one along the creek, that are deep enough to take a nice plunge in after a sweaty morning of work. We began searching for farmland in at least a casual capacity back in around 2018, when both of us got very serious about pursuing farming as a career and vocation. Over that time, we decided to get work in local foods, and I got work managing an organic vegetable farm for 3 seasons, and Lyric worked in local food access and managing farmers markets. So we were embedding ourselves in the local food community while saving up money and searching for a place that we could ultimately call our own farm. The timing worked out that as we were saving and working towards this goal of purchasing a farm, the real estate bubble was growing at a rate that outpaced our ability to save. So the harder we worked and the more money we put away, it felt like the further away the goal of purchasing a farm became. And it was about winter 2021 and early 2022 that we got kind of serious about the possibility of having to leave Western North Carolina. Western North Carolina is a desirable place to live, and even more so than a lot of other places in the country, that real estate bubble was growing and growing and growing. So we were open to moving to some places that we had connections in other states. Northern Michigan and Vermont were kind of at the top of our list. And we felt like that was going to be the only option for us to buy a place. As a matter of fact, at that time, around early 2022, this farm came up on the market, and I saw it for sale at a price that was well beyond what we could have afforded, and well beyond what most young aspiring farmers and farm entrepreneurs could afford. So it was actually seeing this property's listing price at that time in this rural setting, you know, and being a beautiful farm with nice structures and a house, but one that in my mind should have been at a price that was accessible for folks who wanted to farm it. And when we saw this place for sale, it was kind of the last straw of realizing that we weren't going to be able to purchase the type of farm that we wanted to be on here in Western North Carolina, at least. And it was really at that moment of seeing this place and having that realization that we opened ourselves up to different possibilities. And we had never really considered leasing a farm, but we started to open ourselves up to just whatever circumstance emerged, instead of trying to kind of cram our ideal vision into a setting that it wasn't really seeming to work for us. So fast forward about 4 or 5 months after seeing this place on the market and kind of giving up hope of buying a place, we saw it come back up on a website called NC FarmLink, which is organized by the state extension agency. And it's a website with an interactive map and the ability to share profiles of farmers and farm land owners. And the goal is to pair folks seeking the opportunity to farm a place with folks who own the land and want to make it accessible to farmers. So it popped back on my radar, and the posting was really intriguing with language about long-term tenure and, you know, some of the incentives that drew us to wanting to own rather than lease. So we immediately reached out to the folks who owned the place and learned that they purchased it at that price that we saw with the intention of making it accessible to farmers. They seemed to understand that farmland access is a major issue for young agrarians getting started, and decided to leverage their resources to purchase a farm like this with the intention of making it accessible and leasing it at an accessible rate so that we could get started and get our business up and running. A big piece that also drew us to them was the understanding of the incentive of long-term tenure. So to get started, we're in a 6-year lease, and it's the mutual intention of us and the landlord to extend that into a life lease, barring any unforeseen circumstances at the time that this initial lease runs up. So, you know, that kind of trust and understanding and building this relationship with the landowner has enabled us to feel the security to install long-term tree systems and start to develop the landscape in a way that is going to benefit not just this season or next year, but decades and even generations down the line. And we feel really fortunate to be working with a landowner who understands that. A big piece too of building that trust, because I've heard of a lot of lease situations go sour, is that these particular folks had done this with another farmer in another state, and they were multiple years into their arrangement. So we got the opportunity to speak to another farmer who already had a years-long relationship with the landowner, and he had nothing but positive things to say about their situation. And, you know, that gave us a lot of faith to make this leap into an arrangement that we had previously not foreseen for ourselves. They've also given us extreme autonomy over decision-making on the land. You know, it's no small thing to plant out silvopasture system, managing the woodlands in the way that we'd like to, and, you know, the landowner is very clearly coming from a place of humility and understanding that we're folks with experience and know-how and connections to, you know, really steward this place in a meaningful way for the long term. And I think that lease agreements that go sour are ones in which that connection just can't be made for whatever reason, where the landowner may have specific ideas of how things need to look that doesn't match with the farmer's business or their goals. And so for landowners seeking to incentivize farmers, I think that that piece of autonomy is huge. And that requires a certain level of trust that, you know, the farmer's able to carry out what they say they're going to do and that they're going to stick with it. And so it's a mutually trusting and mutually beneficial relationship where the more that we demonstrate to one another that we can walk the walk of what we can do, then the more trust is built and the more longevity is secured in the situation. And, you know, I think there's perks to leasing over owning, and there's perks to owning over leasing. And that's not really what this video is about, the pros and cons of leasing versus owning. But, you know, I would say that for anyone who's struggling to find a farmland opportunity to get started on, in my experience, holding out for the opportunity that felt resonant and right at the moment has really paid off for us. We could have leased farmland, we could have bought some really small farms along the way with the savings that we had, but we had a really clear sense of what we wanted to do and really clear goals in regards to the landscape and the type of farm we wanted to land on. When we first visited this place last summer, we brought with us our extensive checklist of about 80 different criteria for what we wanted the farm that we were going to end up on to look like and features for it to have. And it checked off
virtually every single box as we went through the list. Things like adequate infrastructure to get started, utilities in place, proximity to population centers, proximity to recreation and natural beauty, and every box that we went down, we got a check mark. So that was the moment where we really realized that this was the place for us in this time and circumstance. And despite feeling moments of hopelessness and despair about having to leave this community we'd grown and embedded in Western North Carolina, and potentially having to move away, and feeling like we weren't going to be able to access farmland in the way that we sought to, just holding out hope and continuing to persist in that search really paid off for us, because we couldn't have foreseen this opportunity before it emerged. And I think that the circumstances of it going from this inaccessible farm that I could never have afforded at this stage in my life to the opportunity that we've been seeking all this time in just a matter of months just kind of shows that circumstances can change pretty quickly, and we can adapt to those circumstances and move with what feels like the right opportunity. I think that although that this is somewhat of a rare lease opportunity in the arrangement we have of long-term tenure and a really mutually trusting relationship with the landowner and ourselves, it doesn't have to be rare. And I think one of the keys is for the landowners seeking to lease farms to farmers is to understand the incentives required to get folks who want to be there for the long haul, to get folks who want to really care for the land, and to have the humility and curiosity to allow for autonomy and trust in decision making on the landscape. I think that those are all really key to having a good long-term relationship in which the farmer feels like their work is valued, it feels like they're trusted to take care of the land, and they feel like their investments into the land are going to pay off, like I said, not just this year or next year, but for years to come. And at least in our experience, those were all really key things that we were looking for, that we felt like we could only get through owning, but that through this process we've learned that it can happen in a lease situation too. So yeah, a rare situation as it stands now, but I don't think that it necessarily inherently has to be rare in that sense. So that's just a little bit about our story and our situation here at Wild East. It's a big property with a lot of infrastructure, and yeah, I'm sure that it looks like an expensive farm. That's because it was an expensive farm for the purchase price, and we're just really fortunate to be in a position to be able to lease it for the long term in an accessible way. And I've hoped that this kind of model can progress, and that other models besides direct ownership can allow folks to access farmland in a meaningful way, in a way that allows them to be there for a long time, and in a way that allows them to steward it in the way that they hope to. So it's a topic that is really interesting to me, and that I hope to invest a lot of my time, energy, and resources throughout my life and career into helping in whatever way I can. And yeah, I think it's great for everyone to share kind of their stories of how they ended up where they are and the situations that they're in, because we can all learn from that and learn from each other and see what's possible. It's tricky as a young person getting started to kind of vision the different possibilities that are out there, but different things can emerge in ways that we don't expect.